Everyone knows the Mustangs, the Ferraris, the Porsches, but what about the forgotten legends? These 10 rides didn't just roll off the line. They changed the game forever. They brought tech ahead of their time, designs that shocked the world, and ideas so bold the industry had no choice but to copy them. And yet, almost nobody remembers them today.
Click the subscribe button. This is the channel where you will find rare and incredible facts about cars.
Number 10. All right, folks, gather round because we're about to take a little trip back to the late 1960s. Picture this, the Beatles are topping the charts, muscle cars are ruling the streets in America, Ferrari and Porsche are squabbling in Europe like two rich kids fighting over who's got the fancier lunchbox. And Japan? Well, Japan was still seen as the land of eco-no-boxes, scooters, and sewing machine-sounding engines. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was expecting the Japanese to throw down with a legit supercar. And then, bam, Toyota rolls in with the 2000 GT, and suddenly the world's car snobs had to choke down a giant bowl of humble pie. Now let me paint you the picture. This wasn't some boxy tin can Corolla with a please don't rust warranty. The 2000 GT looked like it had been dipped in liquid silk. Long nose, short rear deck, curvy lines that could make an Italian designer say, "Mamma mia, who invited these guys?" It was low, sleek, and mean, the kind of car that didn't just park, it posed. Honestly, you could park it next to a Ferrari 275 GTB and half the crowd would walk right past the prancing horse just to gawk at the Toyota. Yeah, let that sink in. A Toyota, yes Toyota, stealing eyeballs from Ferrari. That's like a sushi chef beating an Italian grandma in a pasta cook-off. And under the hood, this wasn't some wheezy four-banger. Nope. Toyota teamed up with Yamaha, yep, the same folks who make pianos and motorbikes, to cook up a 2.0-liter straight six with dual overhead cams, cutting edge for the time. The thing revved smoother than Sinatra on a Saturday night, pushing out around 150 horsepower. Doesn't sound like much today, but back then, that was spicy. And thanks to its lightweight and perfect 50-50 balance, the 2000 GT didn't just drive, it danced. Twisties, corners, mountain passes, this baby carved them like a samurai sword through hot butter. Now let's talk rarity. Toyota only built about 351 of these bad boys. That's it. So if you see one today, it's basically like spotting Bigfoot behind the wheel of a unicorn. And if you want to buy one, better be ready to cough up 7 figures, 'cause they're auction darlings now. And hey, Hollywood came calling too. You James Bond fans might remember the 2000 GT in You Only Live Twice. Yeah, Sean Connery rolling through Japan with this stunner. Fun fact, Toyota had to make a special convertible version for Bond because Connery was too tall to fit in the coupe. Imagine being so legendary that car makers literally redesign a car because your head's in the way. Here's the thing, the 2000 GT wasn't just a car, it was a statement. Japan was basically saying, hey world, stop laughing at our tiny econo cars. We can build world-class machines too. And boy, did they deliver. This car didn't just challenge Europe, it smacked them on the cheek with a silk glove and said, your move, Ferrari. So yeah, the Toyota 2000 GT was Japan's first true supercar. It had style, speed, soul, and swagger. It wasn't about brute horsepower. It was about precision, elegance, and proving the underdog could sit at the same table as the big dogs. Bottom line, the 2000 GT was the moment Japan went from cheap wheels to serious players. And the whole world had to sit up, drop their cigars, and say, well damn, Toyota ain't messing around. Number 9. The AMC Eagle, born in 1980, The funky, feathered friend that basically invented the crossover SUV before anybody even knew what the heck that was. Now here's the setup. America in 1980 was not exactly a golden era for cars. We're talking gas shortages, emissions strangling horsepower like a python, and automakers trying to sell you square, underpowered boxes with vinyl roofs and fake wood paneling. Meanwhile, AMC, the scrappy underdog from Kenosha, Wisconsin, was fighting to stay alive while the big three, Ford, GM, Chrysler, treated them like the kid nobody wanted to pick for dodgeball. But instead of lying down, AMC looked at the family station wagon and said, what if we put it on stilts, gave it all-wheel drive, and made it look ready for a camping trip? Boom, the AMC Eagle was born. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some gimmick. The Eagle was legit. It had a full-time AWD system borrowed from Jeep. AMC owned Jeep at the time, which was their golden goose. You could drive it on snow, mud, dirt trails, and then still roll up to church on Sunday without looking like you just came from a monster truck rally. It was like your mom's wagon had a one-night stand with a Jeep CJ, and 9 months later, the Eagle waddled out of the garage. And man, talk about timing. Subaru likes to brag about their AWD wagons today, but let's be real, the AMC Eagle did it first, decades earlier. The Eagle was basically the OG hipster of the car world, rocking all-wheel drive before it was cool, hanging out in the snow while everybody else was slipping around in rear-wheel drive sedans. Now, looks-wise, well, let's just say the Eagle had a certain Midwestern charm. From some angles, it looked rugged and adventurous. From others, it looked like your dad's station wagon had skipped leg day but wore hiking boots anyway. But hey, function over form, right? It wasn't about turning heads on Rodeo Drive, it was about getting your family through a blizzard in Ohio without ending up in a ditch. And here's the kicker. People who bought these things, they loved them. Farmers, ski bums, suburban families, they all realized this was the Swiss Army knife of cars. You could haul groceries, kids, dogs, and still tackle a muddy trail like you were on a Jeep commercial. Of course, being AMC, it wasn't perfect. Build quality could be, let's call it, creative. Rust loved these cars like butter loves toast. And the engines? Well, they were reliable enough, but let's not pretend the Eagle was breaking speed records. 0 to 60 was more like 0 to eventually. But that wasn't the point. The point was confidence. Snowstorm? Bring it. Muddy driveway? No problem. The Eagle was like that buddy who wasn't flashy, but always showed up when you needed a hand moving a couch. And today? The Eagle has this cult following. Car nerds worship it as the first true crossover SUV. Because let's face it, without the Eagle, there's a good chance we don't get Outbacks, CR-Vs, RAV4s, or half the soft rotors people are driving today. The Eagle crawled, slowly, in the right lane, so modern crossovers could run. So here's the bottom line. The AMC Eagle might not have been the prettiest bird in the sky, or the fastest, but it was brilliantly ahead of its time. It was AMC saying, we may not be the biggest, but we've got ideas. And for once, those ideas actually changed the industry. In other words, the Eagle flew, even if sometimes it waddled to get there. Number 8. Let's talk about a car that redefined small but mighty. I'm talking about the BMC Mini, 1959, the little British shoebox on wheels that rolled in and said, who needs size when you've got… Even though the car was about the size of a roller skate, 4 full-grown humans could cram inside without needing to fold themselves up like origami. Okay, maybe comfortably is a stretch, but compared to what else was out there, this thing was roomy. And let's talk front-wheel drive. Back then, most cars were pushing power to the back wheels. The Mini said, nah, let's pull instead of push. That gave it crazy good handling and meant you could tackle tight British city streets without feeling like you were parallel parking a cruise ship. Now the looks, man, the Mini was adorable. It was like if a puppy became a car. Round headlights, a cheeky grin of a grille, and that compact ready-for-anything stance. This car didn't just say fun, it shouted it with a British accent. But here's the kicker. The Mini wasn't just cute, it was a straight-up legend on the racetrack. I mean, who'd think this pint-sized teacup could take on giants? But it did. Thanks to its light weight and nimble handling, Minis started stomping much bigger, more powerful cars in rally racing. We're talking Monte Carlo rally wins, baby. Big, expensive sports cars were left scratching their heads while the Minis zipped past like David punking Goliath at every corner. And the Mini became more than just a car. It invented the modern compact car blueprint. Without it, you don't get Civics, Golfs, or pretty much any of the small hatches you see buzzing around today. It was the little underdog that rewrote the playbook. So here's the deal. The BMC Mini wasn't just a car, it was a movement. It was Britain saying, "Oi world, we may be small, but we're scrappy, stylish, and..." Number 7. The 1962 Oldsmobile Jetfire, the first production car with a turbocharger. Yeah, you heard me right. Before every bro with a Subaru and a blow-off valve was out here screaming psh down Main Street, Oldsmobile was already strapping a snail under their V8 and saying, "Let's see what this baby can do." Now here's the thing, the Jetfire wasn't just some slap-together gimmick. It was based on Old's 215 cubic inch aluminum V8, a lightweight little number that already had pep. But Oldsmobile looked at it and went, not enough. Let's give it a caffeine IV drip. So they bolted on a turbocharger, making it the first production car in history to mass-market boost. That's right, the Jetfire walked so your twin-turbo imports could run. But here's where it gets real funny. See, Olds didn't trust that their brand new turbo setup wouldn't blow the engine to smithereens, so they cooked up this little science project called turbo rocket fluid. And what was turbo rocket fluid, you ask? Basically a cocktail of distilled water, methanol, and a dash of corrosion inhibitor. Sounds like moonshine with an engineering degree. You had to keep a special tank topped off with this magic juice, because if you didn't, the car would cut power like an overprotective grandma saying, "Not today, young man." Imagine being in 1962, rolling into your Oldsmobile dealer. "Yeah, I'll take that fancy Jetfire." "Okay, sir, but don't forget, you'll need to fill it with turbo rocket fluid." "You mean gas?" "No, sir, special rocket juice." And that's when most people said, "Yeah, I'll just take the Cutlass, thanks." The Jetfire made about 215 horsepower and 300 pound-foot of torque. Now I know, that doesn't sound like a whole lot in today's Hellcat world where you sneeze and you're at 700 horsepower. But back in the early 60s, that was spicy. That was enough to smoke plenty of V8s at a stoplight. And the kicker? It weighed under 3,000 pounds. This thing was basically a factory hot rod wearing a suit and tie. Problem was, most owners didn't keep up with the rocket fluid ritual. They'd let the tank run dry, the car would run like a sick lawnmower, and suddenly people thought turbos were unreliable voodoo. Oldsmobile wound up yanking most of the Jetfire's turbos out and retrofitting them with boring 4-barrel carbs. Talk about killing the dream. But here's the deal, the Jetfire was the pioneer. Without it, you don't get Buick Grand Nationals, Porsche 911 Turbos, Mitsubishi Evos, or every other turbocharged legend. Oldsmobile of all brands, the car company your grandpa loved, lit the fuse on turbo culture. They were 20 years too early for the party, but dang it, they sent the invite. So next time you hear some guy bragging about his boosted ride, just remember, back in 1962, Oldsmobile was already out here saying, "Son, we invented boost before your daddy invented you." The Jetfire wasn't perfect. It was quirky, misunderstood, and too smart for its own good. But it was cool. It was gutsy. It was the granddaddy of turbo swagger. Number 6. The 1922 Lancia Lambda, the car that basically invented the modern chassis. Yeah, buddy, without this weird little Italian brainchild, we'd still be out here bouncing around in horse carts with engines. See, back in the early 1900s, cars were basically wagons with motors slapped on. They had what's called a body-on-frame setup, a big old ladder frame on the bottom, body plopped on top, rivets and bolts everywhere. Strong? Sure. Comfortable? About as much as sitting on a church pew during a 3-hour sermon. Every bump, every pothole, every squirrel you ran over, you felt it in your kidneys. Then along comes Vincenzo Lancia, a guy who looked at this setup and said, "Nah, fam, we're doing better." Instead of a separate body and frame, he builds the first production car with a load-bearing unitary body. Translation, the car's body and structure were all one piece, like making a sandwich where the bread and the filling are baked together. Weird? Maybe. Brilliant? Absolutely. And here's the kicker. That new setup made the Lambda lighter, stiffer, and way more comfortable than the clunky wagons everyone else was chugging around in. While Ford was out here pumping out Model Ts like hot dogs at a baseball game, Lancia was basically saying, "Come on, fellas, let's move into the 20th century already." The Lambda also came with independent front suspension, which in 1922 was the equivalent of inventing Wi-Fi in a world still using pigeons. Instead of bouncing around like a shopping cart with a bad wheel, the Lambda glided. Well, glided by 1920 standards. We ain't talking Rolls-Royce here. But compared to the rickety wagons of the day, it was smoother than Sinatra. Now here's the thing, Americans didn't immediately jump on this fancy unibody train. Nah, Detroit was like, body on frame works fine, thank you very much. We'll keep bolting stuff together with spit and elbow grease. It wasn't until decades later that the unibody design became the gold standard. And guess what? Now, almost every modern car, from your grandma's Honda Civic to that SUV clogging the Starbucks drive-thru, is strutting around on some version of Lancia's idea. So, while the Lambda wasn't some speed demon tearing up racetracks, it was the blueprint for the modern automobile. It was the quiet genius, the nerd in the back of the class who invented Google while everyone else was just trying to pass algebra. Think of it like this. The Lancia Lambda is the great-great-grandparent of your ride today. You may not know its name, but without it, you wouldn't have crumple zones, smooth rides, or half the safety tech we take for granted. Vincenzo basically rewrote the rulebook while the rest of the world was still trying to find the table of contents. So next time you see some sleek modern car and think, dang, that's futuristic, just remember, the Lambda did the heavy lifting back when folks were still wearing top hats and calling airplanes flying contraptions.
Number 5. The 1934 Chrysler Airflow. The car that proved being a genius don't always pay the bills. Now, picture America in the early 30s. Cars all look the same. Long hoods, boxy bodies, flat grills, basically roll-and filing cabinets with white wall tires. Aerodynamics? Nobody cared. The idea of testing airflow was about as common as kale in a 1930s diner. But Chrysler's engineers had the wild idea, hey, what if we made a car that actually slices through the wind instead of plowing through it like a barn door? Revolutionary, right? So what did they do? They got scientists, wind tunnels, and more math than most of us want to see in a lifetime, and they sculpted the airflow. It had a sloped nose, integrated headlights, and a body that actually cut drag. Meanwhile, Ford and Chevy were out here selling bricks with wheels. And if that wasn't enough, the airflow also rocked unibody construction, just like the Lancia Lambda we talked about, but Chrysler brought it to the big American stage. Stronger, lighter, safer. This thing was basically the Iron Man suit of the 1930s. You could crash an airflow into one of those boxy jalopies, and the jalopy would fold 4D chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. It may have bombed at the box office, but it rewrote the script for the entire movie.
Number 4. I give you the Citroën DS, a French spaceship that somehow snuck into the car market in 1955 and still looks like it came out of a sci-fi movie poster. Now let me set the scene. Post-war Europe. Most folks are cruising around in cars that look like refrigerators tipped on their side. Boxy, slow, practical. And then Citroën rolls up and says, nah, let's build the Starship Enterprise with license plates. The DS shows up at the Paris Motor Show, and I swear people's monocles and berets were hitting the floor.
In the first 15 minutes, they sold over 700 cars. By the end of the day, 12,000 orders. That's not a launch, that's a full-on mic drop. Why the hype? Well, first off, look at it. That sleek, swooping body. It didn't look like a car. It looked like it should have come with a French pilot wearing goggles and a cape. It was aerodynamic, elegant, and just plain wild. Park it next to a Chevy Bel Air, and suddenly the Chevy looks like it's still waiting for puberty. But the real party trick was under the skin. The DS came with something called hydro-pneumatic suspension. Translation: the ride was so smooth it felt like you were floating on whipped cream. Instead of old-school steel springs, it had a system with hydraulics and pressurized nitrogen spheres. Hit a pothole, didn't matter. The DS would glide over it like a ballerina in a tutu. Farmers joked that you could drive it across a plowed field and not spill your wine. And since it was French, you know they tested it with wine. Oh, and let's not forget, this thing could raise and lower itself like some kind of lowrider on hydraulics decades before California made it cool. Break down and need to change a flat? No jack needed. The DS literally lifted its own butt in the air for you. That's not just engineering, that's a flex. And safety? Citroën was decades ahead. The DS had front-wheel drive when most American cars were still shoving power to the rear. Better handling, more grip. Later versions even got directional headlights that turned with the steering wheel, so you could actually see around corners instead of praying you wouldn't hit a cow. Now, not everyone got it. Some folks thought it looked too weird. Americans especially were like, nice spaceship, Jacques, but where's the chrome and tail fins? But in Europe, the DS became a cultural icon. Presidents, movie stars, artists, everybody who wanted to look smart and futuristic had one. Charles de Gaulle, president of France, famously survived an assassination attempt because his DS kept handling like a champ, even with 2 tires blown out. Try that in your grandma's Oldsmobile. Here's the deal. The Citroën DS wasn't just a car. It was a revolution on wheels. Design, comfort, safety, tech, it changed the whole playbook. Even today, you look at one and it still feels like it belongs in a Blade Runner sequel more than a 1950s street. So, let's give a standing ovation, preferably while sipping red wine and wearing a beret, to the Citroën DS, the car that made the future arrive 50 years early and somehow managed to look cooler than just about anything else on the road then or now. Number 3. A car that was either 50 years ahead of its time or 50 ways to bankrupt a company, the NSU Row 80. Yeah, sounds like a printer model, but trust me, this thing was wild. Picture Germany, 1967. Volkswagen's still making Beetles, Mercedes is doing their stately Benz thing, and BMW is just starting to find its groove. And then out of nowhere, NSU, a little underdog brand, comes out swinging with a car that looks like it just fell out of a UFO. The Row 80 had aerodynamics when most cars were still shaped like bricks. Smooth lines, flush glass, wedge nose, it looked like something from the future. Park it next to a '67 Mustang, and the Mustang looks like it's wearing bell-bottoms and sideburns. The Row 80? That's the guy who showed up to the disco in a silver spacesuit. But the real craziness was under the hood, the rotary engine. Yeah, NSU was like, pistons? Pya, too mainstream. Let's spin this triangle in a circle and call it a day. Enter the Wankel rotary. Compact, light, rev-happy, it sounded like a jet turbine stuffed into a sedan. On paper, it was genius. In reality, well, let's just say mechanics back then didn't know whether to hug it or burn it with fire. See, the Row 80's rotary had one tiny problem. It wore out faster than a politician's promise. Apex seals, those little doodads that keep the magic triangle from leaking, had the lifespan of a mayfly. Owners joked that the odometer didn't measure miles, it measured engine rebuilds. Some cars blew up before 30,000 miles. NSU had to replace so many engines under warranty they practically gave them away like Oprah. You get a new engine, you get a new engine. But here's the thing, when it worked, the Row 80 was sweet. Smooth as butter, revved like crazy, and paired with a semi-automatic gearbox that shifted like magic. Combine that with its sleek shape, front-wheel drive, and futuristic vibe, and you had a car that basically invented the template for modern sedans. Audi, Saab, even the early Lexus vibe, all owe a tip of the hat to the Row 80. Problem was, NSU was too small to carry that warranty disaster. The engine bills bankrupted them faster than you can say wankle. Eventually, Audi swooped in, and the Row 80 went down in history as both a legend and a cautionary tale. So here's the deal. The NSU Row 80 was a genius idea trapped in a tragic execution. It was the kid who shows up to school with a jetpack, blows everyone's mind, then sets the gym on fire because they forgot the safety switch. But hey, respect where it's due. This thing won Car of the Year in 1968 and still looks modern today. It's the car that whispered, "The future is rotary." The future just happened to need a tow truck. So let's raise a glass to the Row 80, bold, brilliant, and broke. Proof that sometimes being ahead of your time just means the world ain't ready for you yet.
Number 2. History buffs and anyone who's ever looked at a car and thought, dang, that thing looks like it came out of Gotham City. Today's tale is about one of the boldest, weirdest, and most gangster rides of the pre-war era, the Cord 810/812. Now let me set the scene. It's 1936. Most cars on the road look like rolling bathtubs with fenders glued on. Big radiators, headlights sticking out like frog eyes, and technology? You were lucky if your ride started without cranking your arm off. And then Cord rolls into the New York Auto Show and drops the mic. Boom! There it was, the Cord 810. Long, low, sleek. It didn't look like a car from 1936, it looked like Buck Rogers' weekend cruiser. Hidden headlights? Yeah, pop-ups, baby, decades before it was cool. First production car in America to hide those frog eyes in the fenders, like the car was winking at you. Aerodynamic coffin nose front end with a wraparound grille that looked like a spaceship's air intake. People didn't just stare, they fainted. Journalists lost their typewriters. The waiting list was longer than the Depression bread lines. But it wasn't just a pretty face. This sucker had front-wheel drive. In the 30s? When everybody else was still pushing from the back, Cord said, "Nah, we're pulling from the front like a sled dog." That meant a flat floor, no big old drive shaft hump, and better handling. Pair that with an optional supercharger on the 812 version, and boom! You had 170 horsepower in an era when most cars were huffing along at 60 HP. That's like showing up to a pillow fight with a chainsaw. Of course, Cord didn't stop there. The dashboard? Airplane-inspired. Chrome levers, gauges that looked like cockpit instruments. Sitting inside felt like you were about to bomb Berlin. And remember, this is 1936. But, and you knew this was coming, the Cord had its quirks. Oh boy did it. The pre-selector gearbox was trickier than algebra. The electrical system was moodier than a teenager. And the fit and finish? Let's just say sometimes the hidden headlights didn't want to come out and play. Customers were like, "Yeah, it looks like Batman's ride, but does it have to break down like the Batmobile too?" Still, despite the hiccups, the Cord 810/812 was a rolling piece of art. It was one of those rare moments where America didn't just build a car, it built a vision. It influenced everything from European coach builders to American designers who finally realized, hey, maybe cars don't need to look like tractors with chrome. Sadly, Cord as a company went belly up by 37. Too much innovation, too little money. Story of automotive history, right? The visionaries rarely get the cash flow they deserve.
But today, if you roll up in a Cord 810 or 812, you're not just driving a car, you're piloting a slice of sci-fi Americana. It's equal parts engineering experiment, Art Deco sculpture, and gangster movie prop. And you can bet if Al Capone had one, the cops wouldn't stand a chance. So here's to the Cord, the car that winked at the future, strutted like a movie star, and proved that sometimes being too cool for your own good is the best legacy you can leave behind. Number 1. The Tucker Torpedo, the car that tried to take Detroit by the lapels, shake it like a rag doll, and scream, "Wake up, you dinosaurs, the future is here!" Now, let's set the scene. It's 1948. America just wrapped up WWI2, the GIs are home, suburbs are sprouting like weeds, and cars? Well, they still look like the ones folks left behind in 1941. Fat, round, chrome-heavy barges with about as much new tack as a butter churn. Enter Preston Tucker, a smooth-talking, fast-thinking Midwestern dreamer who looked at Detroit and said, "Y'all are selling typewriters when I'm building laptops." His weapon? The Tucker 48. And let me tell you, this ride was straight-up space age for the late 40s. We're talking rear engine, yeah, like a Porsche. While the big three were stuffing massive iron blocks up front, Tucker tossed his flat six in the back like he was designing a race car for the family man. Safety features nobody else had the guts to push. Seat belts, long before they were standard, a pop-out windshield designed to save your face in a crash, a padded dash so you didn't break your teeth, and even a safety chamber where the passenger could tuck their legs in an accident. Basically, this guy was inventing the crash test dummy era before anyone was even thinking about it. And oh yeah, that famous Cyclops eye, a center headlight that turned with the steering wheel. Picture this, you're taking a back road curve at night. Your two regular lights show the road ahead, but the Cyclops eye peeks around the corner like, "Don't worry, buddy, I gotcha." Batman would assign the order sheet on the spot. Performance-wise, the Tucker wasn't just a pretty face with seatbelts. That rear-mounted flat six was adapted from a helicopter engine, and it gave the car some real punch. And when paired with that futuristic suspension and wide stance, the Tucker could handle like a dream compared to the clunky family sleds of the era. So why ain't we all driving Tuckers today? Here comes the heartbreak. Preston Tucker wasn't just battling physics, he was battling Detroit politics. The big three automakers and their buddies in Washington didn't like this new kid stealing their thunder. Rumors started flying, lawsuits piled up, and the SEC came after him with fraud charges. The trial turned into a circus, but guess what? Tucker was acquitted, cleared, innocent. But by then, the company was broke, out of gas before the car even had a chance. Only 51 Tuckers were ever built, and every single one is $1 million unicorn today. Collectors drool, museums fight for them, and gearheads like us look back and go, "Dang, what could have been?" Because here's the kicker, the stuff Tucker was preaching in 1948, seatbelts, padded dashes, crumple zones, aerodynamic styling, headlights that move with steering, all that jazz became standard decades later. Preston Tucker was half a century ahead of the curve. So yeah, the Tucker 48 wasn't just a car, it was a middle finger to mediocrity, a four-wheeled what-if that proved America could dream bigger. And while Detroit buried the man, his machine lives on like a ghost, haunting every boardroom with the question, "Why didn't you listen sooner?"